stayed on that line of questioning when I met the Swedish foreign minister today, Carl Bildt. What are your thoughts about Almedalen?
Well, it's a very unique thing. It's been going on for years and it's bigger and bigger, but it's quite fun. It's quite fun.
Mm-hmm. Could I ask you, we're looking at the case of Julian Assange, and 59 legal and human rights groups have made a submission to the UN Human Rights Council challenging the pre-charge detention, which makes it a foreign policy issue. As foreign minister, what are your thoughts on this?
None, because it's a question for the legal authorities and not a question for me.
But because it's in the UN Human Rights Commission, the Council.
That doesn't make any difference whatsoever, because it's still a legal issue within the legal system. And as you have in the US, I guess, you have the separation between the executive and judicial branch. And the executive, that's sort of the nature of democracy or constitutional democracy. If you are representative of the executive branch, you have no say and shouldn't have any say in what the judicial branch is doing, and that applies here as well.
Will it weigh into the universal periodic review that Sweden's up for now before the UN Human Rights Council?
I haven't a clue. I would doubt that very, very much, I have to say.
Could I ask why Sweden doesn't just question him at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he is?
You will have to ask the legal and judicial system on that, of course.
Then last question is this an issue that's being raised to you more and more as you travel as foreign minister?
No, I think I haven't heard it for a long time. I think you are the first one to bring it up with me for probably a year or something like that.
Are you concerned about it? Is it a concern in Sweden, considering he's been dealing with this for 4 years?
Go around here and judge yourself. I think the answer is, of course, no.
Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt. I met him today here at this open-air democracy festival where the politicians, the prime ministers, the foreign ministers, representatives in the parliament walk by everyday people as they discuss issues of democracy. Right now, we're ending the show with Jen Robinson. She is the legal advisor to the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, who has just passed the 2 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He was granted political asylum in Ecuador. Jen Robinson, you just heard the foreign minister of Sweden saying that this is not an issue for a foreign minister, a foreign affairs minister, because this is just in the judiciary in Sweden. Talk about what's happened to Julian Assange.
Julian, it's been almost 4 years now since these allegations first surfaced, and we've filed an appeal last week before the Swedish courts to challenge the arrest warrant because we say it's disproportionate. It's been 4 years that he's been waiting for the purposes of being questioned on these allegations, and it's available to the Swedish prosecutor to be able to go to London and to question him there in London.
Just step back for a moment. Explain why he is being, Britain has agreed to his extradition. What was he charged with here in Sweden?
Julian's facing a number of sexual offence allegations. He hasn't been charged yet. The case before the British courts was purely on the applicability and the validity of the European arrest warrant. It didn't consider the underlying evidence in the case. We have filed an appeal here in Sweden to challenge the detention because we say that it is possible for them to question him through other means. He doesn't need to be in custody to be questioned. And Sweden's done this in a number of other cases. We've also applied for...
You mean that they could go to the Ecuadorian embassy in London and question him? I mean, this issue of him not having even been, in the U.S. term, indicted might surprise many.
It's been almost 4 years and he hasn't yet been charged. The Swedish prosecuting authority says that they need to question him one more time before they can make a decision about whether to charge him or not. And we've been offering his testimony since 2010. The Ecuadorian ambassador has offered him to be questioned with no restrictions from within the Ecuadorian embassy. And we say that this is a reasonable and proportional measure for the Swedish prosecutor to take. If it is possible for her to be able to resolve this case, then she ought to take the means that are available to her to do so.
What about here, the appeal that was just introduced this week by the Swedish lawyers for Julian Assange?
Julian's Swedish counsel have filed an appeal against the arrest warrant based upon the disproportionate exercise of discretion of the prosecutor and the fact that they could actually question him in the embassy. They've also applied for the evidence in the case because we believe that evidence exists which fundamentally undermines the prosecutor's case and would show grounds to drop the case. So we're waiting to get access to that evidence. That appeal should be heard any time in the next week. But I think while this is certainly a legal issue and an issue for the Swedish prosecutor, undoubtedly this has political ramifications for Sweden, for the UK and for the United States. So I do think that it is an issue for Mr. Bildt to give comment on.
You just spoke here around the issue of the internet. You were also speaking about Edward Snowden Snowden. Do you see comparisons between Snowden, who's gotten political asylum in Russia, and Julian Assange, who's now gotten political asylum in Ecuador, yet wanted here in Sweden?
Of course there are similarities. We're seeing now a trend of whistleblowers, publishers, journalists having to seek asylum and seek refuge in countries around the world because of their concern about prosecution in the United States. Julian is inside the Ecuadorian embassy because of his concern of prosecution for his publications associated with WikiLeaks. Edward Snowden is on asylum in Russia for releasing that information. So yes, the cases are similar, and this is our main concern. We would like to resolve the Swedish case. It is not about the Swedish case for Julian being in the Ecuadorian embassy. It is a matter about the United States potentially.
Why the United States? Let's end there.
There's an ongoing grand jury into criminal investigation.
How do you know this?
We know this because it came out in court filings just last month, filed by EPIC, a Freedom of Information case. We know that there's an ongoing grand jury, and the Department of Justice continues to say that this is open. Unless and until the US gives an assurance that Julian will not be prosecuted, he will remain inside the Ecuadorian embassy, and that is and has always been our main concern.
Well, Jen Robinson, I want to thank you for being with us. Jen Robinson is the legal advisor for Julian Assange. She's here at Almedalen, the political week, an open-air democracy festival in Sweden. That does it for our show.